My name's Glyn Robbins. I've worked in housing, campaigned on housing, written about housing for 25 years. In all of that time there hasn't been a more serious threat than the Housing and Planning Bill, which is back in Parliament this afternoon. That's why there are beginnings of a large demonstration here, and what we're saying is that this will affect the future of housing for generations to come. It can have a particular impact on council tenants and housing association tenants, but also more widely on the communities of London, threatening mixed communities, turning London into a place where only the rich can afford to live, and it also does nothing to help the increasingly impoverished private renters who are living in private renting because there's no alternative. So there's a lot at stake.
This bill will effectively run down the whole concept of council housing, of affordable housing. It will drive people out of the cities. No provision has been made for their future. It will undermine family security very much. I think that's the case. You know, we've got to see how children are going to be affected when there's no guarantee of anybody having secure housing anymore. And what is this for? You know, it's a desperate attempt to sell off public land and or to find ways of selling off existing valuable housing just to make profit.
It's almost a blank cheque for private developers because they're now going to be able to provide what are called starter homes, heavily discounted by public money to enable a few people to buy a home while literally millions of people in Britain languish on housing waiting lists. It's also introducing means testing into non-market housing council housing association tenants. For the first time we'll be asked how much they earn, and their rent will then be tailored accordingly if they earn more than £30,000 outside London, £40,000 inside. The government's calling it pay to stay. The other thing that is going to happen if the bill becomes an act is that councils, like the estate where I work, will have to sell off their homes as they become empty if they're in high value areas. So for instance, where I work, last year we had an empty home because somebody died. That home was made available to somebody who had been waiting for years on the housing register. Instead of that happening, and incidentally is a person very vulnerable who needs that home, it's going to be flogged on the private market and lost. So, you know, those are just three examples. There are many more. People who are fleeing domestic violence, people who get a transfer, estate regeneration projects. Every aspect of housing in this country is going to be adversely affected by this legislation.
We're objecting to the removal of secure tenancies for new tenants. So they might be left with a situation where they could only be 2 years in any property, then they've got to look in the private sector. Mm-hmm. So obviously, you know, as a parent myself, and I can see how this would be very bad for the children. We've already got thousands of people on waiting lists in every borough, so this is going to add to this. So I don't think any decision's been made how that's going to be handled. There's an onslaught on public funding. It also includes methods of removing funding from councils so as to make it even more difficult for them to provide either housing or services.
The money from right to buy sales of council estates will be going into the bank accounts of private housing associations. These are organisations that have millions, if not billions of pounds of reserves. They pay their chief executives hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. Islington Council is currently looking at 14% cuts in frontline housing services, and these housing associations are going to get a gratuity from Islington Council tenants. It's absolutely outrageous. We need to say no to the housing bill. This is not over today. We mustn't be fatalistic. It's going into the report stage. It still has to go through the Lords. It then has to go back into the House of Commons. We need to all contact our MPs. If you happen to know any Lords, that would be good too. But more importantly, we need to be out here again, building campaigns locally and nationally to say no to the Housing and Planning Bill.
This bill wants will mean, if it goes through, that to be classed as a gypsy or traveller, you have to travel a certain amount. Now, with the amount of traveller sites there are in the country, travelling is not as easy as it might seem because you have nowhere else to go. So you have to go on the streets. And because they've made it near illegal, depending, you know, except for little loopholes, to actually have a campsite on the streets, pushing us into a situation that means, you know, they have to deal with the law and all the rest of it. At the same time, this bill makes it harder to get more traveller sites. So, in effect, they're pushing us into a corner and trying to wipe, it seems to me, an ongoing process of wiping out travellers and gypsies from this country.
More and more of us are paying more of our income for less and less adequate housing. That's what it means. British people are paying more for housing now than at any time since records began. And what this government are trying to do is turn the clock back to the days when our grandparents shuffled from one private rented flat to another, one landlady's whim to another. And I don't want my granddaughter living the way my grandparents lived. That was the whole point of fighting for council housing, for secure tenancies, for rents we can really afford. And that campaign is for all of us, whether you're a council tenant, a housing association tenant, a private renter, a squatter, or somebody who thinks that private landlords are getting away with murder.
Problems that we saw with the bedroom tax will, I fear, be nothing compared to what we'll see during this Parliament. I think this government wants to end social housing because they can see the provision of housing as a state's responsibility. I think it is. People have a right to a home just as much as they have a right to food and other rights that we consider as givens. It's the government's responsibility. We have more than enough money to provide housing. We have millions of empty homes in Britain.